Toronto Star. I'm Raji Mudder, and this matters. It's Victoria Day weekend, also known as May 2-4, which is well known as the big opening weekend for cottage communities. But like with everything, this year is going to be very different. Cottage communities have been on a different kind of front line, as when isolation hit, many public health leaders warned seasonal dwellers to stay away because of fears they could potentially overwhelm the smaller health systems in those communities. It's been a challenge as leaders have tried to balance the fears of year-long residents, the desires of seasonal dwellers, and visitors looking for an escape. Some communities tried to ban cottagers outright, and there were horror stories, like in Buckhorn, where a cottage owner came to town and bought $1,500 worth of groceries, leaving little for residents. Despite all the warnings, some high-profile politicians said one thing and then zipped off to their lakefront properties. During a normal cottage season, one of the things that we always see this time of the year are guides to cottage country etiquette and how you should act and behave to get invited back. This year, that takes on a very different meaning.
When you go up north, if you want to check on your plumbing at your cottage or heat and seeing what's going on up there, this isn't going to be the typical May the 24th weekend. I'm asking you, please, don't bring a whole whack of people up. It's not the party weekend that's been in the past.
So, for our guide to COVID-19 cottage country etiquette, we reached out to Phil Harding, Mayor of the Township of Muskoka Lakes. Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, this is Victoria Day weekend, aka May 2-4. This is traditionally the big opening weekend for a lot of people with friends and families enjoying their cottages. Obviously, this is a very different year. What are you expecting this weekend?
Well, I am certainly expecting a number of people who've been away from Muskoka for the last 6 months, who sort of mothballed their cottages, if you will, Thanksgiving weekend. They will be returning, but I do believe that there's going to be very much a different weekend. Our bars, our restaurants, our concert venues, none of the fun outdoor traditional activities that go with May 2-4 are happening. So I think it's going to be more of an isolation weekend and people to do some spring maintenance at their properties.
Like everyone, you've been dealing with COVID-19 for the past 2 months. What has that been like?
Well, it's very interesting, especially in cottage country. The Premier has identified this in particular, and my conversations with fellow mayors across Ontario have all found a bit of a divide between what I'll call local or year-round residents and those seasonal residents who oftentimes come up even weekends during the wintertime, but who may have a secondary home somewhere else. And there is a bit of a fear that's going on, certainly between the locals that don't want to receive or feel they're going to be infected by the virus, and not always a welcoming attitude for those seasonal residents.
I absolutely want to talk about those potential tensions that may have been exacerbated. But I do think it's really interesting. I'm sure you've been talking to other areas. I know one community, Norfolk and Haldimand, they tried to ban cottagers and threaten fines. What did you think about that? And was that something that you ever considered?
When I first saw that, I was certainly taken aback. What I do realize is that our economy is a combination of both seasonal, requiring the permanent or local residents, and the local residents certainly requiring the seasonal residents. We are one community. I really don't differentiate between somebody who is seasonal or permanent resident. Everyone owns property. If you own property, you are certainly, in my opinion, entitled to visit your property. I think the big difference that I'm going to see over the next 30, 60, 90 days is the tourism component of traditional cottage country or summer is certainly going to be impacted. And those are the people that I certainly do not need to have here because, again, our attractions are not open. But I believe that we are one community. So I would never want to ban a homeowner from coming up to their home.
In your community, there were some tensions. I believe a local resident put up some signs saying, basically, if you were a seasonal dweller, not to come in. What did you think about that? How did you deal with it?
We had some, I'll call them almost vigilante type actions. And there's been a divide. Last year, we had to declare a state of emergency because of flooding. This year, with pandemic, it's actually been ramped up a little bit. And that is that we're talking about life and death, and people are extremely fearful. So I think they are polarized, their attitudes, their feelings, their beliefs, and they are doing everything they can to protect their family. If those signs were put up on public property, they were immediately taken down. And it's certainly not the attitude that I would want to reflect for my residents year-round or seasonal residents here in Muskoka.
You've already mentioned that there's some restrictions. Let's talk about that. A little bit of less fun. Obviously, there's less facilities that are open, but are there other restrictions? I mean, I know in some communities there are fire bans. I believe your public health officer was saying that public restrooms won't be open for fear of potentially spreading this. Can you talk a little bit about those?
So we do have a fire ban on. No fireworks, no outdoor campfires. But a lot of that comes, I find, with tourists, people using Airbnbs who are coming up for a fun weekend to get out of the city. They've rented cottages. Short-term rentals are still banned. So no one's coming up for a 3-day weekend at the cottage to go hang out and just get out of the city. The people who are becoming this year are residents, property owners. They're hopefully not, and we've encouraged them not to bring friends with them. We're still not allowed to be in gatherings of more than 5 people. So it's a very different looking weekend. It's people utilizing their properties, checking on their properties, raking leaves, putting patio furniture out, doing whatever they need to do to open up their cottages.
I think the public restrooms as well. That says something as well, because, I mean, while public parks are open, there's still limitations for people, correct?
So there will be certain limitations, and it's oftentimes been municipality by municipality. We did not close our public boat ramps. Some did. The marinas are opening up slowly. There's certainly an announcement going to be coming shortly from the Premier's office about the opening and fully opening of marinas. We do know that marinas can start servicing boats. If you need a boat to access your residence, if it be an island property or water roaming access, the marina can give you your boat and you can access your property. So they understand that we need to be on the water at times. If I want to go for a short boat ride with my family that I've been isolating with, then there's no issue in doing so.
I think one of the issues with this has been messaging. Public health officials warn people pretty much straight off the top that the big fear was overwhelming the smaller health centers in these communities. Speaking personally, I know a lot of people who headed to their cottage immediately when everything sort of shut down. And then, of course, the Premier popped up to his last weekend to do some of this maintenance work that you're mentioning. What do you think about the potential confusion there and whether there was any mixed messaging?
Well, I certainly think there has been some mixed messaging. I know our Canadian medical officer of health about a month and a half ago said you shouldn't travel. And that very afternoon, the Prime Minister asked his wife and kids, and they went to their cottage.
After 3 weeks of my family living up at Tarrington and me working here, I went to join them for Easter. We continue to follow all the instructions from public health authorities.
Now it's 18 kilometers away, but still as such traveled, and I think there's an image of that. And I know Easter weekend, the Prime Minister also went to his cottage. The isolation factor, in general terms, Toronto has roughly 3 million people, and it's spread out over 600 square kilometers. Muskoka, we have about 60,000 permanent residents. Even if we double that, added every seasonal resident here, so 120,000 people, we spread over 4,000 square kilometers. So in a way to isolate is to stay apart and not cross paths with people. In many respects, we have a better geographical area to do so. So many people have moved to their secondary dwelling, especially when schools got closed. Their families moved up here. They've been isolating up here, and they have been working with the community to deal with online grocery deliveries or curbside pickup for groceries. Hardware store, again, our hardware store here in Port Carling has offered curbside pickup, even though they're allowed people in the store to protect their employees and to protect the public. They are still only on curbside pickup, and that's their own choice.
What's the message that you would like to get across right now?
The simple message that I'm really trying to encourage people is, number one, we all need to respect this virus. We all need to do our part to isolate and not spread the virus. So when you walk down the street, if you're going to be crossing somebody, take a step back or take a step aside. Where in the past you would feel rude stepping back from someone, we need to have a bit of a paradigm shift and make that the polite and the responsible thing to do. So when I'm walking by someone, if you're going into a store, grocery store, hardware store, any of those places that are currently open, you need to wear a mask. You need to wear some protective equipment. We need to ensure that we don't spread this virus. But then the next thing truly is we need to just hang out at our own places, on our own properties. We need to try and stop as much interaction as possible. Yes, we are going to see people, but we're not doing big, large social gatherings. We also need to make sure that we increase our own personal hygiene with hand washing. That is the greatest thing to help stop the spread of this virus. I think the underlying message as well is that we are all one community. We are one Muskoka, made up of seasonal residents. We're made up of permanent residents. We are one Ontario, made up of people from the GTA and many rural communities. We are one Canada, made up of provinces and people. And we have to work together to stop the spread of this virus, plain and simple. We are all in this together. And as we isolate, as we protect our own families, that is the only way that we are truly going to beat this virus.
The entire small business economy in cottage country is built on this upcoming season. What are you hearing from restaurant owners, ice cream stands, all the small businesses that make cottage country fun?
They're all looking at, number one, alternative methods. So many of the restaurants that are year-round restaurants here are already transitioned and offer curbside pickup. So takeout is their only business today. Some of our other large, I'll call them seasonal businesses, we have in Port Carolina large Turtle Jacks. The last conversation I had with them, they're hoping the province allows some new social distance protocols with restaurants that potentially they'd be able to open mid-June. And I do think, and I really hope, that if we can continue to lock down, if we continue to follow these social protocols, we can flatten the curve. And that was the goal. That was the words we talked about from day one, was flattening the curve to not overwhelm our hospitals. And if we can do that, we can slowly start to restart the economy. And I think the Premier, again, is going to be speaking about that step one and who is included in that step one of reopening this economy. So I'm really hoping for that to happen, again, with all very different social distancing protocols and business operating protocols.
We've already seen some places in Toronto, restaurants close. Are you seeing some of that effect there? And are there people talking about the idea of a lost summer and a lost season and potentially being wiped out?
So I have heard parts of that. I know that in a neighboring community, they canceled their summer theater. That happened up front. I know for ourselves here in Muskoka Lakes, we are doing what we can from a programming perspective that if the province was to unlock, we would be ready to go. We may not start those programs. We may not employ the staff at this particular point to do those, to manage our financial budgets along the way. But we're going to really wait till the 11th hour before we have to cancel anything. And I do know that all the businesses are also trying to do the same. I've seen a number of business vendors that are not open, but are getting ready to open themselves. They're in the shops. They are getting clothing and merchandise out for display with their doors locked, with the opportunity and the hope that summer turns on. And I know the Marinas are doing the same thing. They are running around because of the delay this season in not being able to open. They're doing what they can on the back end to be able to deliver people their boats and get ready for summer as best we can. Everybody wants to save summer, and that's kind of the goal, to be able to be outside. Mental health is the next whole aspect of it. And when you get an opportunity to interact with nature, to sit by the water, to breathe that fresh air, that is probably the best thing you can do for your mental health.
If I'm understanding you correctly, you are expecting a lot of the seasonal residents to return, but how much of your economy is dependent on tourism and day trippers?
Our number one economy is that of our building trade, actually. It used to always be tourism and the day trippers coming up here. We have a fairly large hotel with about 230 rooms, and that's the JW Marriott on Lake Rosso. And then we have a number of other smaller resorts that would be anywhere from 15 rooms to 40 rooms. People like Shamrock Lodge or Sherwood Inn, they're all in shutdown mode right now. But they need those day trippers, weekend trippers, week-long guests to be able to help support them. So tourism will happen, but it's going to be under a different set of protocols. Maybe only half the hotel is allowed to be open. Maybe from a restaurant perspective, half the tables have to be removed. I don't know, and there are far smarter minds than myself. Letters after the name, probably starting with an MD. They will be able to advise the best protocols to stop the spread of this virus, to be able to have some economic help. But our seasonal residents need the locals, and our locals certainly need the seasonal residents to survive. So the shops, the retailers, we really are a 6-month economy, and every day and week that we're not open certainly eats into that.
You expect people to mostly isolate this weekend generally with family. Now, the thing is, a lot of people, depends on who they consider family. And so some of those gatherings could get potentially large. Do you foresee enforcement of things like physical distancing and some of the fines that we've heard about happening in other communities?
So I do know certainly that the OPP are on high alert as to what's coming on this weekend. Our own bylaw officers, where appropriate, will be evaluating. I really hope we don't have to issue any tickets or anything like that. I truly believe that we are a responsible community, and I truly believe that those people who own properties up here are going to be responsible. Yes, there is always going to be one or two outliers. I get that. But the majority, the vast majority of people are going to be respectful and are respectful. I know a number of people who are, quote unquote, seasonal residents have said, we're not coming north this weekend. We're going to continue to follow the Chief Medical Officer of Health's advice and not travel. And that's great. That's their choice. And we have to really protect our own family. I'm encouraging people not to point a finger at you did or you did, to point a finger inward and say, I did this for my family and I am the one who's isolating to protect my family. I can't control someone else. Those outliers will always do what they're going to do.
You talked about it a little bit earlier, and I just want to touch base on it again. The idea of rural and urban tensions, local versus seasonal dwellers versus visitors. Is it fair to say that while this has exacerbated those fault lines, they're always there underlying?
So there has always been an underlying tension between the two. And nobody individually likes to say, well, my personal life and my well-being and my beautiful roads are dependent because somebody else helps support that. Nobody really wants to be told that. So that creates a bit of a dividing line. I use the word the have not. There is a vast difference of wealth, especially here in Muskoka Lakes. And I truly believe we are one community and we all need to support one another. But we have one of the highest levels of poverty in Muskoka in all of the province. People would never equate Muskoka to poverty, but it's true. Our food banks are overrun, especially right now, because many local people who struggle to survive need the services of food banks to get through this pandemic.
I think that's a really interesting point, because I think one of the issues here is no one's going to feel bad for cottage owners because of the idea that they're halves, right?
Correct.
Do you think that because of that, perhaps maybe some people aren't taking the concerns of the community that seriously?
So my messaging to our seasonal residents, and again, the vast majority are super respectful. There again are always outliers, and there are some people who may not be respectful. I think you will always see what you want to see. If I have a mental image that seasonal residents and those cottage owners are just the rich and famous and lifestyle and they don't care about us, that's all I'm going to see. However, if they actually say they do care about us, then we would probably see that as well. There's a great illustration of two people looking at a number that's laid flat before them. One person is saying that is a 9, and the other person is saying, no, that is a 6. And if you look at a 9 or a 6 from the opposite ends, they're both right. And I think we need to sort of understand that going forward. And again, be respectful. Everybody in this world needs everybody else. Nobody is greater or lesser than the other person. That's my fundamental philosophy. It's how I was raised. It's who I am. And that's a community that I want to represent.
One of the things that I always find fun about this time of year is that there's all the stories about cottage etiquette. So let's try and go with that. Let's start with what is good COVID-19 cottage country etiquette?
So at this particular time, and right now for this particular weekend, I think some good etiquette, understanding that our grocery stores, our hardware stores are operating under different COVID protocols. They have to be very careful. Only certain numbers of people can be in the store. So the level of service and their ability to service our traditional made-to-for people and the quantity of people, I can tell you, will not be there. So I'm encouraging those seasonal residents, when you do come, as a protocol, to bring as many supplies as you can. You may not, or it may take you an hour and a half, 2 hours to go get groceries. You don't want to waste your weekend necessarily on that. So I think that's number one from a protocol perspective, to try, and more so for this weekend, we're not talking forever, but right now for the initial influx of summer, to try and bring some supplies. Number two, I think, is most important, to try and isolate. Stay at or on your own property. If you want to go for a walk down your Cottage Country Road, go for a walk, enjoy the fresh air. But we're not going into town to go shopping because the shops aren't open. So let's do our light property maintenance. Let's do our light work. And I use the word some light maintenance and light work from a protocol perspective, because as soon as I have to put up a ladder and clean the leaves out of my eaves troughs, or I take out the chainsaw and decide to start cutting down some big trees, the ability or the chance of an accident happening increase exponentially. When that happens, our first responders, our police, our fire, our ambulance, all have to respond, and that puts those services, they have to break social protocols to be able to help you, and that is inappropriate. So keep the work light. The other thing people need to remember is 20% of the people who have this virus are asymptomatic. So they may be coming up here, they feel normal and everything else. They could be spreading the virus should they go about their normal routines and go into the liquor store and go into the grocery store. So again, try and isolate on your property. Don't put yourself in harm's way, and don't put other people into harm's way. And I think that's really the best social protocol that I can talk about. And again, remember, many people, seasonal residents, permanent residents, everyone around this world, there are many, many people who are deathly afraid, and truly deathly afraid of this virus. Many have compromised immune systems. They cannot get sick. And I respect that. So by respecting that, let's avoid as much contact with them as we can.
Mr. Mayor, this has been fantastic for us. I really, really appreciate your time. This may seem a bit of a weird question, but if we weren't in this pandemic, what do you think you'd be doing right now?
If we were not in this pandemic, what would I be doing? I would be hopefully jumping in my boat and going over later on today for a dinner with a number of friends and welcoming them all back to summer of 2020.
Well, sir, I hope that we get there one day soon. Thank you so very much for your time today.
Thank you. Have a great day and take care and be safe.
That was Mayor Phil Harding of the Township of the Muskoka Lakes. That's it for today. Thanks so much for joining us. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Raji Mudder, Adrian Chung, and Saba Etisaz. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattenden, and our director of programming is JP Foso. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.